What happened at your work which caused multiple people to all quit at once? I was working for a very large IT company. Before the tech bubble burst, we had a meeting with our new director and the VP. They were tired of people complaining about things that should be changed at the job and how they managed people. So they sat around 200 of us down in our auditorium, and the director said she didn't want to hear any more complaints on how she was running things, and if we didn't like then there was the door, and that there was no way we'd leave such a great job. Well, there was a mass exodus and probably close to 50 people left within 2 months. She and the VP were reorged and given 0 reports. They were gone after a round of layoffs happened shortly after. I thought you were gonna say that it happened on the spot. Like she said in a rhetorical way, if you don't like it then there's the door. And then to her shock the entire auditorium stands up and files out. I'm gonna pretend that's what happened because it's funnier. New management. In a month, 4 kitchen staff quit, leaving me to be the only original kitchen staff hire from the previous manager. She completely changed the vibe of the workplace. No one was happy. No one felt like talking or listening to music or being friendly. It was robotic. Worked in construction as part of her HSE team. The chief engineer was pissed that the job was taking slower because of the HSE, especially safety procedures. We had a couple lost time incidents at this point, and just a week before a guy almost died. But he was still pretty pissed about the delays, so he got everyone in a room to say, "You're not here to do your jobs. You're here to do what I tell you to do." 20 people asked to quit on the spot. Working at a local restaurant that had recently changed owners. Multiple issues came up. Difficulty getting off for important things. Hiring people to work in kitchen who were bad at their job but cheaper ingredients, etc. As well as owner just kinda sat around and drank while they're not doing much. Things were tense, and after a few months we were really just hanging in there cause we liked each other. Previous owners were a sweet old couple that set a great vibe. I know some others and I were already looking for a job. Anyways, there was a young mother who waited tables there and really needed the job. Couldn't afford to be between jobs. One night she got a call that her grandmother had a severe stroke, was unresponsive, and was not expected to make it through the night. She asked to get off and start her 3-hour drive to Dallas. Manager says of course, but the owner says no. Manager and owner got into a verbal fight in the back. The waitress ended up pleading her case, crying. Manager said that if the owner wouldn't let her go, he was done. Owner ended up firing them both on the spot. Within the next 15 minutes everyone who hadn't been recent hire ended up walking out of the building. Owners retired. They were literally the greatest people, both very sweet, but kept the place running like a well-oiled machine. They took pretty good care of us and their restaurant. When they left, they gave the restaurant over to their nephew, who at the time was a busboy or waiter. Kind of standoffish, didn't really interact with us too much. A bit lazy at times, but for the most part did his shit and went home. He seemed okay, until he got the power of being the owner. He fired 4 people, including 2 of the 4 cooks, and 2 of the 3 dishwashers, literally that same day, on a Friday night just before the dinner rush, all because he didn't like their attitude. He refused to allow people to take vacation that they'd already requested and gotten confirmed by the original owners. Would change the schedule randomly without telling anyone and then scream at people when they missed a shift or came in late because of it. He'd refuse to replenish the kitchen until we were literally already out of things. Then take forever to put in the orders. He showed up randomly and would drink at the bar, for free of course because he was the owner, and then bring in all his buddies to drink with him. Together they'd get way out of hand and grab at women and try to start fights. Within the first month of him being the owner, over half the staff had quit, usually walking out literally in the middle of their shifts. After being screamed at, they'd basically throw down their aprons and tell everyone else that they were so sorry but they couldn't do it anymore. After the last cook, this big dude who usually kept the kitchen laughing and running at a decent pace, started crying in the middle of his shift and dropped everything he was doing after the boss came and yelled at him for being too slow and making slop. Then walked out. The rest of us just bailed along with him. 4 months later the place was closed. His aunt and uncle were absolutely furious and devastated that he'd run the business they'd built up for over 30 years into the ground. That's really sad, but sounds like a poor decision on the old owners. Who puts someone in a busboy position to such a high position without training and evaluation? If they knew they were retiring, they should have begun to train him so he would be ready to take over, and if they would have realized he was ill-suited, then they could have found someone to take over instead. They laid off half the company with no warning. This included a gentleman who was less than a year from retirement and had been there for 35+ years. The company was shocked when half the remaining people abandoned ship shortly thereafter. At previous and final employer they did a round of layoffs. Now this is Europe, so you need a reason to fire people with a contract. And they said it was for economic reasons. So naturally, like rats on a ship, a massive exodus began. Everyone was looking for a new job. Management didn't expect this. So a month and a half later, they released their Christmas speech, calling for fresh young talent, and asking people to stick together like family when they fired 30 people just 6 weeks ago. Come January, the second wave of the exodus was well underway. Several years ago I worked in a mental health center. We worked primarily with kids. It was time for the center to renew their certification. Instead of keeping up with everything that needed to be done over the course of 5 years, the proper procedures were ignored. In this couple months before recertification, administration made us sit through a ridiculous amount of training on things that would have been covered in training, such as HIPAA laws and identifying child abuse. Then came our paperwork. Our center encouraged us to do things that aren't exactly covered by Medicaid or approved through certification. For example, taking kids to the park isn't allowed. But guess where they instructed us to take these kids so they didn't disturb the therapists working? I had to go back and edit 5 months worth of documents to get rid of the evidence. The kicker was that bathrooms were supposed to have a log of when it was cleaned. An administrator perfectly forged the signatures of multiple employees. I don't think they would have went through that trouble just for a bathroom log. What else were they forging our signatures on? The potential risk of being charged with Medicaid fraud was too high for me. I quit, as did many others. I did report them to the authorities. Shockingly, they are still in business. I did what I had to cover my ass. School district I sometimes sub in had a big round of hiring. A bunch of building substitutes applied for the jobs, and only about half of them got interviews. Of the subs that got interviews, myself included, the only one who made it past the screening interview was a relative of a current employee. The rest of us subs weren't the right fit. The real reason is that there's a substitute shortage and they don't want to lose any of us. Not a single sub who isn't a relative was hired for one of over a dozen teaching jobs. Many of the building subs aren't coming back next year. There's a sub shortage due to really low pay. My district requires subs to have a 4-year degree. Then they pay $140 a day. So even if a sub was able to get a job every day, they could only make 180 days $140, and with no health insurance and no benefits. That. Restructure of the way we're paid. What I used to do involved about 40% client interaction, 20% team, coworker interaction, and 40% paperwork and case coordination stuff. Based on what we do, that means only 40% of the time is technically billable, and there are really sticky rules for what is and isn't billable. So, logically, we were being paid on a salary model. Q management saying we can only make money for the time we have that is actually billable. 1/4 of the department quit. 2 of us on the same day. Wasn't my office but one in my building. The old CEO retired. He was extremely well loved and very fair. His replacement was a lady not known for her social skills. She hired her sister as the new VP and passed over everyone who was in line for promotions. Literally everyone but the sister and the secretary quit the next week together to go work for a competitor. The former CEO had to come back to try and fix everything. He ended up having to help the new CEO hire basically a new company. I don't think it's going well. Many years ago in high school I worked at a movie theater. The place was pretty poorly run from the moment I started there. We never got paid on time and management was basically a bunch of lazy jackasses who sat in the office talking all day and never actually did any managing. It would have been hard for things to have gotten any worse, but after a couple of months they brought in new management who seemed to want to make it their personal mission to run the theater as poorly as possible. They first decided to implement a new policy requiring all projectionists projectionists to wear ties. Despite the fact that projectionists are never seen by the public, not to mention that tiny little detail that the projectionists worked around giant, rapidly spinning objects that a tie could get caught in. Management refused to reconsider the policy and every single projectionist quit as a result. They then decided that the door people, of which I was one, who were always scheduled 7 days a week, would now only be scheduled on the weekends, and refused to reassign any of us to concessions on the weekdays so we wouldn't lose hours. As a result, almost every single door person quit, including me. After that, they started imposing impossible cleanliness standards on concessions. Things like requiring them to scrape popcorn kernels out of the cracks in the trim behind the popcorn machines. Concessions was there until 5 a.m. every night trying to meet the standards. Most of the concession people quit as a result. By my count, the theater went from a staff of about 50 to a staff of about 12 in 3 weeks. I swung by about a month after I quit and found out that entire management staff had been fired and replaced yet again by an entirely new one. Ones who actually seemed to be running the theater properly. My best guess is that the previous management had been told to whip the theater into shape and they were idiots who had no idea how to effectively do that.